kind of go to a very familiar verse or section of Scripture. It's one that I think that we all are pretty familiar with. We know the story. We've heard it over and over and over again. And I just wanted to take it and go in a bit of a different direction. And Jesus always told stories. You know, whenever he was teaching people, he never said, okay, here's my sermon today and here's my 3 points I need you to get. You know, he would always say, there was a man. And, you know, he would tell the story about what happened and how it happened. And he would leave it on the listener to kind of interpret it. And that's awesome. We're sort of at a disadvantage today, though, because we're not in the same culture that he was telling this story into. You know, we're going to talk about the prodigal son this morning. And when you read the story, it's neat, right? We all read it and we're like, oh, good. You know, it's a story about forgiveness. And, you know, we see that. What we don't quite understand is that the whole story is not just about the younger son. The younger son is a character in that story, but what Jesus was really talking about and who he was really talking to was the older brother. When you go through and you look at the culture that he was speaking to and the group of people that were gathered that he was speaking to, you see that he was talking about a whole different thing than we often catch just on a quick look at that verse. So if you have your Bible, look at Luke chapter 15. And we're going to read verses 1 and 2. We're going to read a lot of scripture this morning. So let's start in Luke chapter 15. We'll read verses 1 and 2. That'll set the scene, and then we'll go through a little bit, and piece by piece we'll kind of collect this information. So in verse 15 it says, now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him, or to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes grumbled, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. Okay, so here's the stage. It's set. Jesus is up there, and he's getting ready to teach. And who's there to listen? It's the Pharisees and the scribes are over here on one side, and the sinners and the tax collectors are over here on the other side. And so I didn't mean that. Sinners and tax collectors, hey guys. No, didn't mean it that way, but it works. But just think of it. It would have been sort of like this. I mean, you would have seen a clear definition of the two groups. How many people watched the Florida-Georgia game yesterday? The Florida-Georgia disappointment. You know, if you looked over those aerial shots of my fair city where I was born, Jacksonville, Florida. But if you looked at the aerial shots and you looked down into the stadium, what did you notice? There was almost a clear-cut division right there. You see orange and blue, red and black, red and black. I mean, it was I was like, I kept saying to Natalie like over and over, like, look at that. How did they get him to do that? I'm just kidding. But it would be sort of like that. I mean, these people would have been so separated, and just the scribes and Pharisees would not even come near them. They would have just been an 8-foot radius around them all the time. And you see what were the scribes and Pharisees saying? They were grumbling about what Jesus was teaching. Almost always whenever you see Jesus teaching and the Pharisees and scribes are there, they're always grumbling. They're always complaining about what he's saying there. And most of the time they're complaining about who he's saying it to, who he's talking with, who he's around. Okay, so I told you we're going to talk about culture a little bit. In this culture, what did it mean when you invited someone to come and have a meal with you? Sorry, I'm used to youth. I can't. It's a long way away. You got to speak up. But whenever you invite someone, it's sort of like this culture, only it's a lot more casual in this culture. When you invited someone to come and eat with you, it was a sign of acceptance. It was you saying, I accept you as who you are. It's like a sign of friendship. Pretty much like us. You don't go and invite someone that you don't really like to go eat with you. But the scribes and Pharisees would have never eaten a meal with these people. They would have stayed away from them, over wagging their finger saying, you sinners, you sinners, you sinners. And, if you look over and over and over through Jesus' ministry, who was he always eating with? Who was he always talking to? Who was he always after? It shows what was his mission. Exactly. Us. Thank you. It wasn't to come and hang out with the religious people and say, you guys are doing a good job. I'm glad that y'all don't go around those sinners. It was to come and to seek and save that which was lost. That was his whole purpose, was to come and find the sinners and find the people that needed him. And if you look, the next two parables that he tells, and we'll go through these real fast, it demonstrates that mission, over and over again. He says, so he told them this parable. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after that one lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost. Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need repentance, or who need no repentance. Jesus was coming to save that which was lost. He was coming after those sinners. He was looking for them. That's who he was after. You go to the next parable. He says, or what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and seek diligently until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and her neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost. Just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. He's demonstrating, he's telling the story, and he's making sure to get this idea across. I'm here to save that which was lost. I'm the woman that's sweeping the house with the light. I'm the man that leaves the 99, and I go after that one. There's an awesome song by Audio Adrenaline. It's kind of an older band, but it's called 99 or something. I don't remember the name of it, but it's about that. Look it up. You'll know when you hear it. So he's setting the stage with this, and I wanted to just a couple of things that you can pull out from these stories about this culture, because you have to understand that this culture is so completely different than our culture. It would be night and day. What we hear in this prodigal son story and think, oh, that's a sweet story. That could be on Oprah. They would have heard, and these Pharisees and scribes would have been like, throwing dust in the air and couldn't believe it. And the sinners and the tax collectors would have been just overjoyed hearing that there's this kind of forgiveness. So let's look at the culture just for a second, that you can see one thing out of these two stories at the end. This culture was a tight-knit group, right? We think of ourselves today as a tight-knit group. We have our friends and we know who they are, and we have Facebook, and everyone's friends on Facebook, and we all keep up that way. But this group would have been their lives would have been actually like intertwined together. If one person was hurting, the other person would know about what it was and be hurting with them. If one person lost a coin, and don't think of a dime, think of $1,000, or think of a large sum of money. If one person lost this money, the rest of the people would, when they found it, would rejoice. It wouldn't be like, yay, good for you. They would literally rejoice. It would be an awesome thing. So you have to understand that this culture is not separate. It's very tight-knit. It's a very close-knit group of people. So then you get to this parable of the prodigal son. And the word prodigal, anyone know what that word means? Anyone? See? Okay, this isn't to be like, ha, because I only know it because I just read it. The word means to spend everything in pursuit of something, to literally, to go completely, just everything, bankrupt, in order to go after this one thing. So we think of it and we hear prodigal, and what do you immediately think of? You just think of evil, or the bad son, or whatever. That word could be applied to every, or both people in this story, the son and the father, in different ways. The only person that word couldn't be applied to is the older son. So remember that. I would ask you, when you go home tonight or today, get a dictionary out and look up that word, because I'm giving you a real easy definition, but look up what it means and see if that doesn't apply to the God that we serve. That he has literally spent everything to come after us. That he's literally given up his only son so that he can know you, so that he can sweep the house and find you. That's just a side note, that word, I like it. So he says, and he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. Okay? In this culture, in our culture today, if a kid did that to their parents, it's almost expected, right? They're teenagers, or they're young and they're impetuous, and they can't handle waiting, and they're just going to do what they want to do. And they're going to sow their wild oats. As Americans and as this culture that we live in now, it's almost just expected that that's what people do. It's wrong. I mean, it's not what should happen, but it's expected. So the Pharisees and the scribes, when they heard that, I mean, literally would have been aghast. I mean, they would have been like, could not believe that this son would have the audacity to ask for this share of property before his father had passed away. Because that was what he was basically saying. I don't care about you. I don't care about the respect that you're due as my father. I don't care about any of the shame that it's going to bring on our family. I don't care about that. All I care about is getting my stuff. I want the stuff that's mine, and I want to get out of here. I don't want to be under your rule anymore. I don't want to have you telling me what to do. So just give me what's mine, and I'll go. What would be the normal response to that in this culture, do you think? Usually the father could disown the child and just say, you're no longer my son, get out of here. I'm no longer taking care of you. I no longer know you. They would have had a funeral for the kid. I mean, or they literally could have killed the child. I mean, they could have had the child stoned to death. I mean, it's hard for us to understand that in this culture, respect for your elders and respect for your father in general was tantamount. I mean, the way that the people would even just refer to their father and speak to their father. That story where Melissa, I think that's so funny, and she's like, if I wanted you to know, I'd tell you. Hey, amen. that in that culture, that would have been like a light punishment. And it's just so hard for us to understand and connect with this culture because it's so different. So when they hear this, the Pharisees and the scribes and the sinners and the tax collectors, all of them would have just been thinking, wow, I can't believe the disrespect that this person is showing. And some of the tax collectors and sinners would have probably been thinking like, man, that sounds like me. That sounds like what I've done. And then the next little section there is when it would have just gone crazy. It says, and he divided his property between them. He did it. He said, okay, it's yours. There was 2 sons. I don't know if you guys know much about the way that this would have been divided, but the older son, you had special privileges. He would have got 2/3 of the property, and the younger son would have got 1/3. That's just how it was. If you're the younger son, sorry, that's just what it is. So he would have, but let's think about this for a second. I always thought of this story, and I thought of the father like grabbing these 2 big money bags with dollar signs on it and be like, here you go. There wasn't this like monetary thing going on a lot of times. And it was a different kind of society. What was the most valuable thing to these people? I heard it, but you got to say it louder. Land or property, that's would have been what they were all about. This property, especially to this culture right here, property would have been just the utmost thing that you could have. If you had a lot of property, you were rich. So whenever he's given this property, it doesn't mean that he's given this stuff. I mean, he's literally given his share of the property. His 1/3 of the land is given to him. Okay? How does he leave the country and spend that property? How does that work? It wouldn't. You can't. Not like he's digging it up and like, I got dirt. It wouldn't work. So what would he have to do? He'd have to sell it. You'd have to sell it. Okay, who in this community that's so tight-knit, that knows each other, that if one's hurting, the other's hurting, would have bought that? It's seen as such a shame Who in there would have bought that? No one. No one in that community would have touched that land. They wouldn't have talked to that son. He would have been the most shameful person there. So what does that mean? He had to sell it to a stranger. He had to sell it to someone that was from outside of that community. You know, so he's brought on shame by telling his dad, I don't care about you, I want my stuff. You know, he's brought on shame because the father did it. And now he's brought on even more shame because he sells this property, this land that, I mean, it would have been everything to these people. And he sells it to a stranger. You know, this is the land that the grandfathers and the fathers of this community would have fought and died for. You know, it's no joke. They would have really just been like, everyone would have thought that was the worst child, worst kid, worst person that they'd ever met or heard of. So we go on and we see, not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey to a far country. And there he squandered his property with reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. How did Jewish people feel about pigs? They're not digging them, right? They're not like, hey, we have them for pets. You know, it was unclean. You know, it would have been, I don't like to say like the worst job of worst, because, you know, I've had some pretty bad jobs, and, you know, it doesn't make you a bad person because you've had a bad job, but think of the worst thing that you could possibly do that, you know, would be bad, and that's what it would be to this son. I mean, it would have been just an awful thing to have to degrade himself to this point where he's literally feeding the pigs. And, you know, in the next verse he says, hired himself out. Verse 16 it says, and he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. So he's not only just like, you know, demeaning himself to have to feed these pigs, but he's literally wishing that he could eat what the pigs were eating. You know, it's like, we don't even, you know, that's just nasty. So he says, but when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? Excuse me. He says, I will arise. Okay, in this culture, I say that a lot because we're trying to get this understanding of this culture. But in this culture, it was taught that when you apologize for something, you couldn't just say, I'm sorry. You know, if I stepped on, that's not good. If I stole your wallet, you know, Pastor, you came and you figured out I had stolen your wallet, which would be bad. You know, the youth pastor stole my wallet again. Man, that was weird. But let's say I did that. It wouldn't be enough for me just to say I'm sorry. You know, that wouldn't work in this culture. It wouldn't be enough. I would actually have to make restitution for that. I would have to give back his wallet, give back his money, you know, pay back his, you know, any bills that I had run up with his credit cards, whatever. I would have to figure out a way to pay that back to truly be forgiven. That you had to earn your forgiveness in this culture. It was seen, the rabbis would actually teach that if you wrong someone, you can't just say I'm sorry. You can't just be forgiven, that you have to pay for it. You know, that you have to make a payment to get that right. So what you're seeing is he's devising this plan of what he's going to do, not only to be forgiven, not only to say I'm sorry, but to actually make restitution and be forgiven. It says, but when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? He says, I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, he's rehearsing this speech, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. That doesn't just mean, I always kind of thought that it meant like, I'm going to go to my dad and say I'm sorry and tell him, you know, can I please just be one of your servants now? I'll just, you know, live here and you can make me a servant. I always kind of thought that's what he was after. But notice the word hired there. It's not there on accident. Nothing in this verse, nothing in this word is here on accident. Everything's on purpose. When he uses that word hired, he doesn't just say, let me be one of your servants, let me be one of your slaves. Let me be one of your hired servants. Hired servants didn't live on the property of the father. They didn't live with the family. A hired servant lived in the village, and they were like a tradesman or a craftsman. They would be someone who who worked to earn a wage so they could pay for what they had. So what he's doing, he's not only saying, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before earth, or whatever. Sorry. I'm no longer to be called your son. And he's saying, I want to work for you. I want to pay back, for this land that I've taken from you. I want to pay back. I want to make restitution for this. So you see, he's got this plan, and it says in verse 19, verse 20, he says, and he arose, and he came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion. Number one, it's just weird. We think of compassion as the norm. If you don't have compassion, you're just heartless and weird. It would not be the norm in this culture. It wouldn't be normal for this man to feel compassion on the son. It would have been normal for him to, not even see him. It would be normal for him to stay completely away from him, to disacknowledge his existence. That would have been the normal thing. Keep losing my place. It says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran. No. Men in this culture, no run, ever, period. What did they wear? Robe. They didn't wear slacks or shorts, no Nikes. It would be awesome if we all still wore robes. I'm just going to put that out there. If that becomes the new trend, I'm on board. And you see, I'm like, this is comfortable. But let's just say this robe would have gone all the way down to their feet. So what's something you'd have to do if you're wearing a robe in order to run? You have to hike it up, and take off running. Okay, number one, women ran, little kids ran, men never ran. They didn't happen. And to see the leg of a man, for him to have to pull up his robe and to show his legs was shame. It brought shame on that man. For him to run, it brings shame on that man. We're seeing something here. God is pushing this in our face. He's showing us he's taking the shame that belongs to the son. That he doesn't let the son have to walk back through this village in front of everyone and be seen as just this, how much shame that he's going to get. He runs to his son. He goes after him. He seeks him. And then he takes the shame on himself. And then he embraces him. Compassion, he embraced him, and he kissed him. Okay? Let's think for a second. You've been working in a field with the pigs. You're starving to death. You're starving to death to the point where you're like, I'm going to go back to daddy and suffer all the shame. He's probably just decrepit looking. He's dirty. He's been all over pigs and all around pigs, and he's filthy. I don't think that he stopped anywhere and was like washing himself off. You don't see that anywhere. You see that he just arises and goes. He goes back to his father. So you got to picture this idea that he's coming up to his father and he's covered in this filth. And it's such a beautiful picture that he's covered in this world. He's covered in the disgustingness, that the lifestyle that he's been living in, and all the shame that he's taken and brought to his family. He's covered in it. And he goes to his father, and his father doesn't just say, hose him down, or, go clean yourself up and then you can come hang out with me. He runs to him. He embraces him. He takes the shame on himself and he kisses him. If you could stop right there, that's beautiful. It's just a beautiful idea. That's enough right there. Okay, but then it goes further. Okay. Verse 21, it says, and the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Okay. He had more to say, didn't he? That wasn't his whole little speech, was it? The father cuts him off. He doesn't let him finish his apology. He doesn't let him tell him his plan of how he's going to make things right. He cuts him off, and he shows him grace. Mercy and grace is not the normal thing. This is so abstract and beyond our normal thought. When someone does something wrong to you, what do you just naturally want to do to them? I'm going to punch him in the face. Shoot. talk to me like that. I'm going to take care of business. This is the opposite. To show someone grace, let's use the same scenario of if I stole your wallet. It's really funny to think of, and it's giving me some ideas. But let's say that I did that. What you could have 3 different little options there. Okay, you could have the justice. What would justice be? Press charges. You have me arrested, put me in jail, and say, I'm going to put you in jail until you've learned your lesson, whatever. Okay, that's an option. That would be correct. That would be the right thing to do, right? Yes, I'm not asking you. I'm telling you that's the right thing to do. Someone steals your wallet, it's the right thing to do naturally to press charges, to show them justice. God has to show us justice. God has to be just. He can't be any other way. So there's the other option of mercy. Okay, you can show me mercy and say, okay, just give me back the wallet and we'll just forget this whole thing, or how we won't tell anybody. We'll just let it go. Okay. Then there's the third option. There's grace. Now grace is so weird. Grace is strange. I'm telling you. Keep the wallet. In fact, you didn't get my other one. Here's my hide a wallet in my sock. Let me take you out to lunch and let's go get ice cream, and I love you, and I just want to show you my love. That's what the Father does. The Father could have shown justice, and he could have just shown mercy and said, whatever, get it, you go be the hired servant. That would have been mercy, to let him be the hired servant. But he says, Father, I've sinned against you, against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. He says, but the father cut him off. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand. What does a ring mean? I hear what is it? Family. It means a covenant. When you give someone a ring, when the Pharaoh gave Joseph the ring, I think I've got that right. What did it mean? Authority, power. You're saying you're second in command. Here's a ring that I'm putting on your finger that shows that you have authority over everything except for me. When he puts that ring on his son's hand, he's saying, you're my son. You now have authority in my kingdom, with me. You're one of us, basically. Puts the robe on him. That's showing I'm taking you back as my son. I'm putting a ring on your finger. I'm giving you authority. And then he asked for sandals or shoes to be put on his feet. The servants, the hired servants especially, but the servants didn't wear shoes. That was only people that were part of the family. Slaves didn't have shoes. It didn't work that way. And then he goes even further. He says, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. How often did these people in this culture typically eat meat? It wasn't Golden Corral. They weren't chasing around chickens and eating drumettes. Meat was a very expensive, rare delicacy. When they killed an animal and ate it, it was for a feast or a celebration. That was the point behind it. It wasn't just, we're all hungry, let's eat a goat tonight. There weren't a ton of goats, so they would literally only do it when there was something to be celebrated that was important. Okay, and a goat would just be the starting point. The fatted calf was something that you saved, and that was for like the big deal, a wedding feast, or just some huge deal, a victory in battle, or some humongous thing. That's when you killed the fatted calf and ate it. That was the biggest feast that you could have. Okay, so it says, and kill the fatted calf, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead. When he uses that word here, it's not a mistake. It's not on accident. And he doesn't mean that, it literally, when you left the society and this culture, you were dead to them. And in some cases, they would literally have a funeral, and you were buried and you were gone. You were no longer there. We don't understand this culture because it's so different. Shame was so big. When you brought shame on someone, it was huge. So he's saying, my son was dead. I mean, he was literally dead. He was gone, and he's alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to celebrate. Okay, so there's this big festival going on. We talked about how this culture, the people weren't, just scattered around doing their own things. They were all together. So when the celebration would have started, I mean, everyone in this community would have been there. Everyone would have come out. It would have been like, you may not like these people and want to go, but they have meat today. So let's go eat. They're going to feed us. They're going to, show us a good time. It's going to be a party, So everyone would have gone. Everyone would be there, all right? It would almost be, if you didn't go, like today, if you invited me to a party, and I was like, I don't want to go. It wouldn't just be, well, whatever. It's like, what a jerk. I'm having a party, and I'm doing all this stuff, and they don't even want to come. It was like a shame kind of thing. And back then, it would have been seen as a huge shame for you to disregard this invitation. So I'm setting you up because we think that we've got this whole story figured out, right? We think that we've figured out, it's all about this forgiveness and grace, and it really is. I mean, that is huge in the story, but there's a whole nother aspect that's coming up. It says, now his older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house. He heard the music and dancing, and he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. He's out. What is he doing? He's out in the field. What do you think he's doing? He's working. And we've always looked at this older son and been like, yeah, he's doing it right. Haven't we? We've always thought, man, that older son, he has got the right idea. He's working for the father. Okay? And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. Okay? That doesn't work. This older son has stayed home. He's been home. He's taken care of the father. He's taken care of his land. He's done everything he's supposed to the right way. Right? These scribes and the Pharisees that are listening here, they would have been like, that's our man. Right there, that older son, he knows what's up. He's working for the father. He's doing it the right way. He's observing all the cultural ideas that he's supposed to. He's showing the reverence that he's supposed to for his father by living and doing exactly what he's supposed to do. He says, but he was angry and refused to go in. Okay, now we've already talked about this whole idea of shame. And what the son did, the younger son was a shame. When this older son did is a huge shame as well. He's bringing more shame upon the father because everyone would have known that he had two sons. Everyone would have known that the other one, you didn't just stay out because you were tired or something. They would have known that he was staying out because he didn't want to be there, because he didn't like what had happened. He disagreed with it, and he was showing his disrespect by not showing up. He says in verse 28, he was angry. Verse 29, I'm sorry, verse 28, you have to read the rest of that. But he was angry and refused to go in. It says his father came out and entreated him. Okay? Entreated, what does that mean? Pleaded. I was going to say begged, but I like pleaded. That sounds good. Pleaded. I mean, he's literally pleading with his son to come into the feast. Okay? It's not normal. That wouldn't be the right thing for him to be doing. Number one, for him to leave the feast, for him to leave his own party, would have brought shame on him. People would have started murmuring, what's he doing? He can't control his own kids. The first one ran off, and now this one's outside. It literally would have brought shame on him to have to go out of his own party, but then to go out and to have to beg his son to come in, to plead with him, please come in, please. It would have been taking more shame on him. It says, but he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. See, the whole idea of the meat was just for celebrations. But when this your son came who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Let's stop there for just 1 second. And don't have much time. I got to step on it. I want you to understand that these two sons were doing the same thing. They both were looking for ways to control the father and get what they wanted. Neither of them really cared about the father. The younger son showed it. I mean, he was just outright said, I don't care about you. I'm going to go, spend money on prostitutes and hang out in a field with pigs. I don't care. The older son, he didn't care about the father, but he stayed there. He manipulated it in a way that he could get what he wanted. He just had to wait it out. He was doing the same thing. He was just waiting it out. This story was not meant as just some story to tell. This story was meant for us to hear and to put ourselves into one of those classifications. Are we the older son or are we the younger son? Are we doing what we're doing because we feel like it's our duty and that we have to do it and we're going to show God how good we can be so that he can give us his blessing? It's like the mentality of I'm going to tithe so that God has to give me money. He has to take care of me if I tithe. God doesn't have to do anything. He's God, in case you missed that whole thing. God does what he pleases. We're here for his service. We're here for his pleasure. That's it. Or are you the younger son who has just gone buck wild, do whatever you want, and you are your own God? That's it. There's those two places. That's it. There's one thing in the Bible, or there's two things in the Bible, and there's one thing that's never there. There's black and white. There's never gray. Jesus never says, it's kind of like, he says it's this or it's this. Nothing in the middle. He doesn't take anything lukewarm. He doesn't take that middle stuff. He says it's hot or it's cold, it's black or it's white. That's it. And so he's telling this story so that the Pharisees and the scribes can hear, you're the older brother, and you're standing outside the feast. You're outside of it because you feel like you can control it, and you don't want to have to bow down to anybody in order to come into the feast. And the younger one, the sinners and the tax collectors are out there, and he's saying the same thing. Give up, surrender, go back to the Father, come back. I'm here to seek and save that which was lost. I'm here to lay down my life for you. I just want to finish this so we can get the whole picture. He said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. That's literal. He was the only son that was remaining at the time, right? He's telling him, everything that's mine is yours. The rest of the property is yours. Think about the other reason the son was probably upset is because he stayed there, and now there's this diminished inheritance, and because the father made him the son again, so now he has to split it again. The son's going to get inheritance because he's a son again. So the older son's like, I'm losing money here, or land. Son, you were always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. And there he just stops. He cuts it off right there. He doesn't give you a resolution. And these people, the Pharisees and the scribes and the sinners and the tax collectors would have been sitting there on the edge of their seat just like, what happened? What's the end of that story? It wasn't on accident that he cut it off there. It's meant so that you can look at yourself. It's meant so that you it's like a mirror where you hold it up and you look at yourself and you say, am I the younger son or am I the older son? Who am I? Why am I? What's the whole point of this is not so that I can serve God in order to get something. It's I serve at his pleasure. I've surrendered my will. He's in control. I'm not. That's the whole point. And I was thinking about this, and we want to do something with the teenagers just to kind of show you a demonstration sort of it. This little story, the younger son would have had this really cool testimony. When you think about it, in this culture, his testimony would have been, just wild. And this story, if you tell it in other cultures, if you tell it in India, you tell it in, especially like a Muslim or where they practice Islam, it would get such a different response because they understand what shame means. They understand what all this is about. So he would have had this really cool testimony, to be able to say, this is what I did, and this is what the Father has done. And so we want to share with you guys today, basically, the idea is for you to see this is who we have been, and this is now who we are because of Christ. Because of what he's done in our lives, this is who we are. So, Ron, if you want to hit that song.
You